So if you're watching this video, you are probably learning a new language and you're probably also having a hard time learning how to speak to other people. Yes, I totally get it. I understand how you feel because for me, I was in the same boat. I didn't want to speak to anybody. I was afraid of making mistakes and looking like a total idiot. So I really was hesitant to speak to native speakers. So you might have also heard that when you're learning a new language, it's important to immerse yourself in an environment where you're learning and you're using the language, which is why a lot of times people say you need to be in that country to actually learn how to speak. And for me, you know, I'm in Canada right now and I don't have any opportunities like right now to actually just go to another country and just do whatever I want. So the next best thing that I decided to do and use was language exchange apps. Specifically, I will be talking about Tandem and HelloTalk today. And so if you're struggling to find ways to improve your speaking in your target language, you don't really know who to talk to, again, be sure to keep on watching because I want to actually share with you guys some tips and tricks around how to actually have a phenomenal and amazing language exchange chat with someone in your target language. And before I go into the tips and tricks, I actually want to give you guys some backstory from me. So I actually started downloading my first language exchange app in 2018, I think. And around this time, I actually downloaded it because I wanted to speak to more native Vietnamese speakers. I can speak it pretty conversationally now, but I wanted to kind of get more comfortable speaking with strangers in a wide range of topics, right? And then at the same time as well in 2018, I also started to learn Korean. And in my city, I obviously didn't know any Koreans. I didn't know who to speak to improve my Korean or to, you know, get feedback and get help and stuff like that. So yeah, I decided to use it for Korean and then Vietnamese. And then of course, I decided to pick up Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, and Japanese along the way. So up until this point, I have used these language apps for all of these languages up to this point. So overall, I've been using these apps again for about 3 years to date, and Tandem and HelloTalk are probably my favorite ones and I'm on them pretty often. For example, I've been using Tandem for, again, 3 years and I have over 100 references, meaning I've talked to over 100 people who have provided me feedback and kind of recommendations on how they enjoyed speaking with me up to this point or during our conversations there. However, as much as I can vouch for using language apps, I know that there are some negative sides to these language apps. Sometimes people tend to use them for dating purposes or some other strange like investing purposes. So I think for me, I will not be talking about the negatives of language exchange apps. This is totally a disclaimer, but it's based on my experience and what I've really enjoyed about using it so far to this date here. And so the point of this video is for me to show you guys how to actually have a good language exchange so that you're not actually just talking to someone and you're saying, hi, hello, how are you? Where are you from? What's your name? What do you study? And to actually have a meaningful and very diverse topic to actually help you guys get your speaking level to beginner, potentially up to intermediate as well. But hey, I'm not here to say that small talk is not cool. I love talking and getting to know people in terms of introductions, but I find that when you're learning a language, it's a barrier that can get you from beginner up into intermediate. Small talk and introductions like that in the very beginning of your language exchange conversation with someone else is amazing, don't worry, don't get me wrong. But I think in order to get you guys from beginner up into intermediate where you can cohesively express your thought in a different language, you're gonna need to be more exposed and to be more willing to talk about different things other than just your school and your hobbies and your interests, right? And so the first thing that you need to do in order to make sure that you really have a good conversation on a language exchange app, whether it's HelloTalk or Tandem, is to really identify which level you are in. And it's pretty easy to say that maybe you're a beginner, you're intermediate, or you're a advanced speaker. But I think to drill it down even more is to identify the specific level you are. So in language learning, how it's kind of broken up is in those 3 buckets, there are 2 levels in each. So in the beginner section, you have A1 and A2. Pretty much A2 is broken up into beginner or upper beginner. And then in B1 and B2, this is more intermediate, so we got lower intermediate or upper intermediate. And then in advanced, we also have C1 and C2. So we have lower advanced and upper advanced. So a big way for you to identify where you are in your speaking level, you can really use these labels as a good way to guide how you are progressing in your language journey. For a lot of these languages, whether it's Chinese, Korean, German, like all these other languages, a lot of the time when you're studying in those language books, they identify these A2, A1, C2, all these different levels when you are learning. So when you're looking for language resources, a big part is to identify the level that you're in. And if you're not really sure which level you're in, there's actually a lot of online resources and even YouTube videos that actually tell you guys, hey, if you're an A1 learner, these are the typical words and vocab and structures that you should probably know. And you can go from A1 to A2 to B1 to B3, B2 to C1, C2, and then you can see, hey, you know, I don't really know that much in C2, and I also don't know that much in C1, but I do have a good grasp on B2. So when you're looking at videos or assessments online that tell you whether or not what level you are, this is a good indication that this is probably your appropriate level of vocabs, topics, and where you are in the language. And so just for a quick example, for those who are Mandarin Chinese learners, you probably know about the HSK 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on the old system. And a lot of times people would associate, yeah, hey, I am a A1 learner. That probably means I'm an HSK 1. Also, alternatively, if I am a B1 learner, this probably means that I am a HSK 3. Or if I'm a B2 learner, this probably means that I am an HSK 4. Figure out which level you are in your language learning journey, because a lot of the levels, whether it's in Mandarin Chinese or in Korean, they will typically have a certain type of vocabulary or structures that are most suited for you when you're trying to learn the language, right? Like obviously when you are a B1 and you try to look for resources that teach you C2, it's going to be pretty obvious that you can't understand most of that stuff, right? So that's when you go back and go like, hey, like I actually need more B1 material because I'm not really ready for like a C2 material just yet. And so after when you've identified which level that you're most comfortable in terms of vocabulary, speaking, and reading, this is kind of where it's really important for you to identify topics that you can be comfortable speaking with. So when you're learning a language, it's really important, like I said, to try to get past the small talk and the conversations and the hi, how are you, where are you from? Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to express your thought, right? If you can't express your thought in a new language that you want to learn, then you're going to need to find out how to do that. And this is perfectly one of the best ways that I have found for myself has worked really well. First thing that you have to do is identify topics that you actually like to talk about. So for me, I am really passionate about talking about self-development, personal development, life realizations. And so topics for me that I would typically like to talk about in English: what are your proudest moments in life? What is your biggest regret in life? What is something that you learned from your family? Or what are things that you're really excited about in the next couple of years here? So being able to think about these topics and topics that you generally like to talk about in English, and then seeing how those translate into the levels in which you are in. For example, talking about your hobbies might be definitely like an A1 conversation, and then talking about your biggest regrets in life can definitely be somewhere between like B1 or B2 because that requires more vocabulary. Then you're able to really identify the topics that you're talking about when your stages and which levels that you're in your language learning journey. And if you're not really sure where to find topics you can really talk about, I actually used a link from someone pretty recently. I'm gonna include a screenshot here, but I follow her on Instagram and I think her Instagram handle is like multilingual Marissa, so be sure to check her out. I really like this web link and I used it especially when I was trying to practice conversations in a different language. And so at this point, you've identified which level you are in your speaking, and then now you've identified also topics that you actually enjoy talking about. And so the next thing in the process is to really identify words you don't know about these topics. So for me right now, I'm probably at a B1 or B2 level in my Chinese. I don't think I'm like an C1 at all. So I ruled out any kind of C1 material or vocabulary, and I don't look at that stuff. And I look at topics that I feel like I can talk about in my target language. So in Mandarin Chinese, I wrote all my topics out in a notebooks. And then after, I took the time to think about, hey, so if I'm going to talk about this topic in Chinese to someone else, what are some key vocabulary or key terms that I need to know in order to convey my thought? So here's some examples. One of my first topics I ever really practiced with was to talk about my favorite Chinese drama or show. And some other ones I had were my proudest moments in life, or what was my first job and why did I pick that first job in Canada. So being able to find out what these topics are in Chinese, and then also the vocabulary that I would need to convey my thought process. So at this point, you might be wondering, hey Nick, this is kind of weird because I don't really know why I would be pre-planning my language exchange or my conversations. Well, if you think about it, if you're actually talking to someone in your native language, and sometimes you don't really know the vocabulary, naturally you pause, right? You usually have like things like or I don't know, or hold on a sec, I need to look for something. And so before you even engage in a language exchange or in a conversation with someone else, the biggest thing is to realize what words you don't know. Right? And so when you're actually having a natural flowing conversation, you can actually just look at your notebook when you're on the phone with someone and be like, hey, like I actually know this is something that I know because I wrote it down beforehand. The biggest thing here is also not to really be focused on your grammar, because that's where your language exchange partner comes in. The biggest thing here is being able to express your thought in another language. Grammar comes in after. Having a big part and having a really strong focus on grammar at the beginning, I find that can really slow you down at times. Naturally, when I learned English, I learned grammar, but obviously a lot of it didn't stick in my head. So a lot of it did come from saying something, realizing that I'm wrong, and then fixing it after. And so I'm finding that with this kind of strategy and this kind of way of learning, the same thing is being applied, right? You need to say something, get corrected, and then learn from that, instead of trying to learn the right way and then trying to, express that thought the right way. And so again, the biggest thing here is to really expose yourself to new sentence structures and languages. And so when you're learning a language, it's really important for you to be exposed to as many sentences and vocabulary as possible. And so it doesn't really matter if your grammar is terrible. Really, the biggest point here is to express your thought. Okay, so the last step in the process is to find a language partner. And I will be completely transparent with you guys and say that this is probably going to be the hardest part, because a lot of times, depending on the culture and how people take it, it can be very hard to find a solid language partner. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of times people might take offense depending on how you approach them. I know that sometimes people have approached me and just say, hey, can you call me right away? Whereas sometimes people will want to get to know you on text message first before they engage in a phone call. So for example, on Tandem, some great ways that you can use this app to find good people that you can engage with are, the references section, their profile, maybe even location if you're actually interested in meeting in person. So it's really great because on Tandem, you can actually explicitly say if you're open to meeting in person, having a phone call, or actually texting as well. And it's also great because you can also put down how many hours a week that you want to engage with. If you find that you want to learn pretty frequently, but then the person that you're hoping to approach actually doesn't want to use the app that often, then they might not be a good fit for you, right? So depending on your level, just try to find someone who has a decent amount of references, some serious bio or kind of details in their profile. A legitimate profile picture is obviously a good one as well. On HelloTalk, I find that HelloTalk's really great because for me, I am a big fan of the moments section. So here's a screenshot of my moments section. I do believe I have over like 100 moments. So a lot of engagement, a lot of comments, a lot of feedback as well, a lot of likes. So that is a good indication. So for me, I really like to see people who are really engaged on their moments, because the moments section on HelloTalk is basically like a online journal kind of entry where if you want to get feedback from other languages or language learners who are native in your target language, they can provide you feedback, commentary, and corrections instantly. Similar to Tandem, HelloTalk also has the feature where you can search for people in your nearby area, whether it's the moments or even as well the location or individuals themselves. So if you want to go ahead and look for people who are more serious in your area and you want to engage in an in-person conversation, then you have that opportunity to do so there. HelloTalk has also this interesting feature where it's like serious learners, and it basically filters out people who are pretty frequent and always online on the app. So this might also be a good indication to you if you want to look for someone who's actually more dedicated to using the app, because you can kind of imply that people who are always on the app are also pretty keen on using their target language with new native speakers as well. Finding a language partner is honestly very tough. In the 3 years of using these two language apps, I feel like I've had probably like 1,000 conversations with different people. It's just hard to keep in touch, right? And a lot of times, especially for me, because I am in Canada, the people that I want to speak with are in different countries, right? So you also have to keep a note of the time zone difference as well. China and Korea are like 12 to 14 hour difference from where I am now. So that's just something to keep a note when you are trying to find a language partner, and just, you know, try to be more understanding of the situation too, right? Sometimes they have a job, you have a job, and so it can take anywhere from a few days to a few hours to a few weeks to find someone that's pretty legit for you to practice your language speaking. My personal thoughts about finding a good language partner, I think in the very beginning when you engage with someone, whether it's giving them a message or a phone call, is to really be upfront about your goals. Like for me, I want to go to China and I want to improve my Chinese. Like I really want to do that, right? So I usually approach it with that, and people who are serious will be like, hey, yeah, let's totally set some time to talk and let's have a language exchange going on, right? So usually that works out pretty well. But not only to say that you're upfront about your goals, but to also say that, hey, like if you're willing to help me, I'm also going to be willing to help you as well in your target language, which for my case is usually me helping them with their English. And another thing to keep both of you accountable when you want to set up time to chat and to have a phone call is to actually set up a time. Yes, sometimes people will be like, hey, do you have time to talk now? Do you have time to talk now? Do you have time to talk now? Like depending on your comfortability and if you want to do that, sometimes people might find that a little weird. So I think for you, I think if anything, just set up a time, set up a day for you to talk. Having a time and having a date actually does keep you both accountable for the conversation that you guys want to have. And this is the perfect situation for you to bring those conversations in. So you found a partner, you found a time, you found a guy or a girl who's willing to help you. You want to also let them know what you want to talk about. So you also want them to come in to know what the topic that you want to talk about in order to have a good conversation. I find that language exchange, specifically calling someone or even doing a video call with someone on HelloTalk or Tandem, can be terrifying in the beginning. It's really weird to talk to strangers. You know, when you're growing up in Canada, they always tell you stranger danger. More recently, and for the last 3 years, I just found that like I've really come out of my shell. A big part of language learning is to actually meet people, right? And so that you can get more familiarity and exposure to that culture and that language. And so past the negatives across everything that you've heard about regarding online networking and stuff, I find that language learning, especially through these two apps, I've had so many positive notes. I've been able to meet people in person in my city who are native speakers. I've been able to make some pretty cool friends who even have given me my Chinese and Korean names. So I have no regrets, and I'm sure that when you're trying to learn a language for the first time, you will probably have the same process and the same experience. Try not to be discouraged, because you know it is an online space that you just need to be careful with who you meet and who you kind of talk with. But again, at the end of the day, there are generally really good people on either apps that you try to use it for. And so I wish you guys the best of luck with your language exchange, especially on a phone call. I hope that you were able to take away some kind of piece of advice in terms of how you can have a phenomenal phone call or language exchange on one of these two apps or any online other app as well. If you guys are watching and you made it up to this point, I would really like to hear your thoughts on language exchange apps, which ones you liked, which ones you didn't like, but also maybe some stories about some positives and maybe even some negatives too, because I'm really curious to hear your experiences on these apps and the type of people that you've been able to meet and all that sort. So with that said, I wish you guys the best of luck with your language learning journey. Again, if you guys have any questions or comments or feedback, let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you guys in my next one.